In the cluster of the Marianas Islands is an island known for the spirits that inhabit. On Guam, the concept of the Taotaomona appeared to have emerged while the Spanish still occupied the island. It's believed that the Chamorro people turned to the memory of their before-time ancestors for pride and comfort. Taotaomona translates to people before, while also referring to the ancestral spirits that inhabited the earth along with the living. The Serranas are believed to communicate with the Taotaomona and were taught to heal and counsel the Chamorro people, while the Guamanians saw the Taotaomona spirits as pesky, troublesome, and sometimes evil, who mainly inhabit the jungle. This definition is known to be highly influenced by Spanish Catholicism, which did not see the Taotaomona as spirits of Chamorro ancestors, but rather as pagan, evil spirits of their ancient, uncivilized past. Through the following interviews, I hope to enlighten you on the spirits that are believed to roam the island of Guam.
Yeah, for sure. We lived there for about 6 years.
Yes, I have, but I've never encountered any Taotaomona spirits.
I lived on Guam for a total of 4 years. I lived there 2 years one time and then 2 years a different time.
I was born and raised on Guam, and I was there for about 15 years. I went to high school there and until I was a sophomore, and then I came back here to the States.
I've been a couple of times, but I don't remember much about them.
I remember this one time running with my Auntie Jeannie and Uncle Joseph by the base, and it was probably like 10 at night or something. And I started falling behind, and I was like really thirsty, and Joseph had the water. So I shouted to them to slow down and wait for me, and they did, but when I got there, they freaked out on me and started yelling at me because I was gonna wake the spirits. I'm like 8 years old, so to me that was like the craziest thing, because I'm just like, what are you talking about, spirits? And I guess they were pretty crazy about that.
Told us that the spirits don't like pregnant women, so the women dress themselves in their husband's clothes and spray themselves with perfume so that the spirits stay away from themselves and their child.
I do know that if you enter the jungle without praying, it can lead to some harm because you're entering their territory. So the legend is that you do need to pray before entering the forest.
I'm about a young girl who preferred to swim in the ocean over doing her chores. So one day, while swimming in the ocean, her grandmother and her mother put a curse on her to swim with the dolphins, and since then she never returned. So Chamorro people now believe that she turned into a mermaid and still swims with the dolphins.
One of the legends is a guy went into the boonies and peed on the banyan tree and became paralyzed for the rest of his life.
When I was on the island, there's always these legends about the Taotaomonas and other spirits, and so whenever my cousins and I would go around and play, it would be mainly near the boonies, and my grandma and my mom used to always get mad at us because they were scared that we would run into a banyan tree, which is supposed to be really haunted, and the spirits put a spell on you, and so they were always paranoid that we were gonna get hurt or have a spell cast on us, and so we just have always lived with the Taotaomona legends and have always feared being near the banyan trees. So back around 1997, my grandmother passed away, and me and my girls, Darian and Dakota, had to fly to Guam to go to her funeral and her rosary, which her rosary was like 7 days long. And we had a long flight. We arrived to my mom's house, and I told Darian to go downstairs to change. So she was changing, and mind you, I've never believed any of the legends that I've heard up until this point. I told her to go downstairs and change, and she did. But as she was changing, she felt spiders on her. So she was screaming and crying for me to come and get them off. And when I went to go help her, there was nothing on her. And For hours and hours, she kept crying that spiders were crawling on her, to the point where she was so exhausted from crying. And during that time, my grandmother and the Taotaomona spirit was supposedly visiting her. And I was very close to my grandmother, and so she would pinch my cheeks when I was younger and chase me around. And Darian was describing an old woman pinching her and chasing her. And all I kept thinking was my grandma and the spirit. And I never believed it until it was happening to her. My mom told me, well, it's grandma visiting, her spirit, and the Taotaomona is visiting, and it was hard for me to believe, but I started believing it. So we went to a witch doctor because we couldn't help her. She was still crying, and it was hours, mind you. It was like 5 hours in, and they did a whole chant spell on her to try to remove the spirit from her body with coconut leaves, banana leaves and coconut oil. After that, she calmed down. She kind of fell asleep in the car on the way home. And then about 2 hours later, she woke up screaming and crying, telling me that this lady's chasing her again and pinching her cheeks. And finally, my mom didn't know what to do either, and so we took her to the emergency room. And as the medical doctor was examining her, we told her, I don't know how it came up, but we had told her that my grandmother was in the hospital, in the morgue. And so she also believed that it was my grandmother in the spirit visiting Darian. And just hearing that from a medical doctor was kind of weird. But at that point, I was really believing it. After that, she gave her a sedative to calm her down. And as we were leaving, my mom went to the morgue and said a prayer and talked to my grandmother and told her to please leave Darian alone. And after that, the spirit was gone. She was normal the next day. She didn't remember anything about spiders or anything. It was like it never happened. It was the weirdest thing, and I'll never forget it.
In the jungle, do they live out there for a while, or do they just like...
Some of them they do.
Oh,
Some
really?
of them they
That's
do.
like their permanent home?
Yeah, because my brother's wife, she passed it, so her dad was a Serrano, I guess, whatever you call that.
Yeah.
So his 2 daughters, one was gonna marry a Filipino and one was for my brother. And he didn't want them to, I think he don't want them to get married. So my sister-in-law was saying that one time there were 2 girls that came, little girls, in white dress. Came over and told them, follow me. And they followed her, the 2 girls. And the girls kept saying, follow me. And my sister-in-law who died, and her sister kept following them. So they were wearing white clothes. And they said, keep following me. So actually these 2 little girls led them into the woods. And then when they got close to her aunt's house, she pointed them to go over. Then they disappeared.
It was racking my brain for a long time. The reasons why my grandmother visited my daughter. And the only thing I can think of is she was the only one that met her between my 2 girls before she passed away. And she just loved Darian and always pinched her cheeks, now that I think about it. And I think that was her way of communicating to her family somehow, for some reason. But it was just so strange to me, because I've never believed in anything until then.
4 years ago, yeah, people still asking about it, and they want to hear it.
Ordot Chalampago resident Priscilla Tenorio Rodriguez is known locally and across the nation as the woman who unknowingly recorded the voice of a Taotaomona growling and laughing in the mid-1970s. 4 years ago, I had the rare opportunity to sit down and listen to her tales and respect for these ancient Chamorro spirits. Today, she recounts her story of how her 2-year-old son Tony was learning to speak Chamorro at the time and recorded him in a room with just the two of them.
So I start recording him and start asking him questions, or start answering it in Chamorro. So he kind of just jumped off the bed, and the dresser was open, heard his pinky, started crying. From there on, that thing came in the tape, and I didn't know anything about it.
She explained she didn't notice anything strange about the recording until later, and when she heard it, she was confused and scared by the sound. Rodriguez wanted to erase it, but her father, Francisco Kitaguac Tenorio, also known as Tunsupiano, the master healer, told her otherwise.
I was going to erase it and said, wait, I'll let my father hear it first. So I let my father hear it. It's them. I said, who's them? I said, the Taotaomona. I said, how can that be? I said, they're everywhere. They can be in anywhere, anything.
Rodriguez saved the tape, and from there it took a life of its own. Every fiesta, she says, more and more people would come to listen to what was recorded. So beware, for the first time, the family has allowed PNC to air a snippet of what was recorded. Tony doesn't remember being recorded and didn't know about the tape until he was in elementary school. For a long time, he says he couldn't even listen to it.
That thing is creepy. I mean, and to know that it was me, that creeps me out even more, right? And it wasn't until maybe even after high school that where I was able to sit down and listen to the whole thing without, getting so spooked.
But there's more to the Rodriguez family story. In fact, Mrs. Rodriguez and her sons Tony and Fred continue to experience unexplained events to this day, including our camera crew. Last time we noticed the lamp flickering on and off during our interview in 2007. And this time, our camera had recording problems, not once, not twice, but 3 times. It all started as soon as we entered the Rodriguez house, and again when Tony entered the living room. Yeah, we even recorded it when we're talking. It's and we're I'm just looking at it oh man, what's going on?
Okay, we're good now.
Okay.
From the top.
Okay, so it wasn't brought to your attention until... Tony says his family is religious and superstitious and finds it interesting many of his Taotaomona experiences centered around his grandfather, Tunsupiano. He mentions he feels fine that people try to debunk these encounters because he's tried to do the same, but he believes it's real. He just doesn't call it supernatural.
I don't even call it supernatural. It's just, it's Taotaomona, right? But you just kind of, I don't take it as seriously as some people because it's just something you're not just accustomed to, but it's like you know it for a fact. Because people say, well, I'll believe it when I see it. And my uncle always has this saying, there's nothing when you see it, there's nothing to believe because it's there.
He also talks about his most recent encounter when he was asleep.
I was sleeping like this with my hands clasped. And I felt really weird feeling. It's like someone physically grabbing both my thumbs, but with one hand kind of thing. And it lifted and dropped my hands. Almost like, hey, wake up.
It's as if someone was waking him up to make it on time for church. But Tony says his experiences were never anything violent. Tony's older brother Fred also says the same thing. He shares another story of a family friend of his deceased grandmother's that visited them in the late 1980s and how an unplugged window air conditioner unit suddenly turned on after not working for years.
Her visit was good. She felt that it was time to go and she got in her car and would wave goodbye to her. And the air conditioner turned on And we looked at each other. That
And it didn't just turn on; it came out of
full
maximum,
blast.
full blast.
What the heck was that? Right?
So yeah,
It was unplugged.
It was unplugged.
and it was on. When we looked at it, it was on the on position.
Fred also raises the question, what about other ghosts and angels?
How do we not know we're encountering actual ghosts? Because there is no official teaching in the Catholic Church about the ghost, right? What do you do? But there is a common understanding to pray for them.
Calling them real-life mysteries, Fred says it is all connected to Tunsupiano somehow. He recalls when he was little, he played with someone that looked exactly like him, and suddenly he was on top of a 15-foot coconut tree. He remembers his mother asking his grandfather and his uncles for help to get him down.
My grandfather always seems to be the epicenter of these attractions, right? He with the recording, me with the physically being put up in a coconut tree.
While Mrs. Rodriguez says she's a little disappointed with the way the TV show Destination Truth investigated her family story, she says it doesn't change anything. In fact, the Rodriguez family points out these encounters with the Taotaomona find a way to bring people together and talk more about the respect and values of the Chamorro culture.
Nothing's going to change that story just because of that international broadcasting happens. Nothing changed.
You know, we call it supernatural. Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and just accept it. So that's why I guess my point was about Taotaomonas. There's no debunking it, but or I'm not trashing. I think what I'm saying is, let's consider something else.